Hello and welcome to this video on sleeping disorders, their origin and treatment within peak state therapy. My name is Gaëtan Klein, I am a certified therapist, and I'm going to talk to you about how I've dealt with sleeping disorders with my clients and how you can also identify which might be the origin cause of your sleeping issues. We're going to talk about chronic disorders, which means that they have been ongoing for several weeks and they're not related to a specific medical issue, because in that case you have to seek advice from your doctor. Now, with that being said, here are the 7 elements, 7 type of disorders that we're going to talk about that I've been treating and that I know peak state therapy is efficient on, which are overthinking, sleep apnea, hypervigilance, waking at night, the need to urinate, night terrors and nightmares, and bruxism. And I'm going to put chapters in this video so you can directly switch to the ones that you're interested in. Now, a short disclaimer, this video content is not medical advice or diagnosis, so please ask your doctor if you have any one of those disorders. The information shared are here only for purpose of education. And do not change the treatment if you're taking any. All right, let's move on to overthinking. So overthinking is the difficulty to fall asleep at night when your mind does not shut down and you keep thinking, and you never really can put your mind to rest. And that happens when the mind is searching for solutions to things, either things from the past, like what did I say, what should have I said instead, or the future, what should I do, how can I deal with this? And your mind just keeps running and racing all the time. So the origin of this problem is often an unrecognized emotion. And by that, I mean an emotion that we're not really aware of, and we don't really notice that we are stressed or tensed. And that's because we keep focusing our attention in our mind, in our head, instead of putting our awareness in the body, in the region of the heart, the solar plexus, the gut, etc. And because of that, our mind searches for a solution, because that's its job, right? The job of our brain is to create solutions. But in that case, it's an emotional problem, and you won't resolve it with your intellect and your mind. So your mind keeps thinking about the situation over and over, but the problem is never really solved. So the solution to that is to take a few deep breaths and to put your awareness down inside your body so you can notice, feel, and accept the emotion as it is, without resistance. The key is to not try to find a solution with your mind, but to accept the feeling as it is. And then to use tapping or EFT or other peak states techniques to feel and accept the emotion. And one thing that you might find useful is that the overthinking itself often has the same emotional tone as the emotion. So when you are overthinking and your mind keeps racing, notice that there's an emotional tone in the thoughts themselves. It might be worrying, might be being frustrated, might be fear or anger, etc., etc. And if you notice what it is, you might find it easier to notice that you have the same emotion somewhere in your body. And then you can treat it with peak state therapy or tapping. So sleep apnea is another very common sleeping disorders. I have a lot of people coming to me for this issue. And strangely, I've observed that sleep apneas are almost always caused by very specific peculiar sensation, which is suffocation. And at first, when people came to me, I never thought about treating sleep apnea. I had no idea. But I've always found this suffocation to be present. So suffocation is a feeling that the air is not passing through and there's an area of your body that is not breathing. And very often it surprises people because it can be anywhere from the nose to the belly. So you can have a good breathing in your chest, let's say, and have suffocation in your nose. Now what happens at night is that this suffocation starts to play out when you're asleep and your nervous systems react with the suffocation, and so you don't breathe, right? You suffocate instead of breathing deeply. Now, this suffocation is always coming from traumatic memory. So These traumas are often hard to heal on your own, so I'd recommend working with a therapist on them. But if you're already very knowledgeable and very used to using pizza therapy or EFT or similar techniques, the key is to find the emotion that is underlying the suffocation. So where there is suffocation, there is always an emotion. And then if you want to treat that, you have to accept suffocation, which is tough, but you can do it. Often with the help of somebody, it's easier to do it. I think that's important to realize is that there is always psychological reversal on this type of emotions and this type of traumas. So if you don't know what it is, then don't worry about it. It's something that you learn when you practice EFT or pixel therapy. And that means that your body is going to put a defense mechanism to keep in place the problem. For example, let's say that you have suffocation and you realize that behind it, the emotion is panic. Now, your body is not going to release the panic and get rid of it because your body believes it needs to hold on to it to survive. And that's why you have to take this into account if you try to treat it. Now, all therapists practicing pixel therapy do it very, very well. It was an easy and neat technique, but be mindful that there's going to be resistance if you try to hit it on your own, which I don't recommend anyway. And here's the typical examples. So most of the times the emotions behind suffocation are fear, very simply fear of dying or choking, drowning, claustrophobia, being confined in a small space, etc., etc. And I've had a few people who got to a childhood trauma where somebody put their head down in a swimming pool and they felt like they were drowning, and that's where suffocation was coming from, but it might be from other events also. And I started working on that pretty recently, so I really wanted to follow up and check what success rates I had, and it's pretty high, which surprised me at first. So on 12 cases that I've had so far, 11 were successes, of which 7 needed a respirator at night. So if you yourself have sleep apneas and you wake up tired, you feel that you don't really recover during the night, and if you know somebody also who has that problem or is using a respirator, now you know that there's a solution to feel much better when you wake up. And that's priceless, waking up with energy and being able to face the day and have a good day. It's really amazing to see those changes. Here's an atypical example that I found interesting. So I had a client who had a constant flowing sensation at the back of the throat after she had a sinusitis a few years back. And she thought it was the sinusitis that was ongoing, but the doctors told her, no, your sinusitis is gone, so this sensation should also go away. And she was taking medicine, but it was having no effect at all. So, we ask ourselves, is there an emotion behind this feeling of flow that was really disturbing her? And there was an emotion. And the emotion we found was powerlessness and the feeling that things that should be said could not be. And of course, it was linked to a trauma. So we healed that trauma with pixel therapy, and her sensation of flow disappeared, and she was able to sleep much better and to feel refreshed in the morning, and she was really happy with that. So it's interesting to see that sometimes what prevents us from breathing and to recover during our sleep is not just suffocation, but similar but different type of sensations where things are not going well in this area, from the nose, mouth, throat, etc. So hypervigilance is also a very common sleeping disorder. So hypervigilance is a feeling of never really relaxing and always being aware that there might be some danger, so latent danger, latent menace, and being watchful all the time. Even if you're not really aware of it consciously, and obviously you don't decide consciously to be watchful and aware, but instinctively, automatically, your body reacts this way. And when you have a hypervigilance, you usually have a bad recovery from your sleep. Waking up at night can be frequent, and then you have difficulty to stay asleep or fall back asleep. So you're always kind of watchful and alert. And the origin of that I found in the people I've worked with was a feeling of needing to stay on alert, to stay watchful, as if there was a real danger for your own physical well-being or somebody else, a closed one. And the origin is often from a trauma, even if sometimes it's pretty hard to find the link between the traumatic event and sleeping, because sometimes it's not obviously related, but it's always the origin of that. So a few examples. I've had people who were hypervigilant because they lost a loved one. Can be a parent, can be a child, can be someone you love, something like that. From aggression and from housebreaking. So housebreaking can be really traumatic, even if you're not in the house at the moment of the robbery, let's say, because our home, our house, our bedroom are places of safety. They are our sanctuary, they are our little nest. And if that place has been violented, it feels like violence to us and we lose the safety. So housebreaking can be a serious trauma and it can lead to hypervigilance and bad sleep. Also, I've had people who had bad surprises, bad news, something unexpected happened. And from that moment on, they felt that they could not let themselves be surprised anymore. They had to stay on alert all the time. And there was no relationship between the bad surprise or the event and sleeping or being at home, etc. It was just the feeling that I need to stay on alert. And it was not something that they consciously were mindful of. It was really under the radar, so to speak. And very often in hypervigilance, we feel that there's a loss of safety somewhere. So the solution to hypervigilance is obviously to treat the underlying trauma, the unconscious obligation to stay on alert and to protect yourself or to protect somebody else. And it can be a simple thing, it can be just one event that triggered it, or it can be something more complex that therapists call complex trauma. So if you don't know what that is, ask your therapist. But the goal, from my point of view, is to restore a feeling of safety and that your bedroom, your home is a sanctuary. That's really, really important for deep and good recovery during sleeping. Now let's move on to nocturnal awakenings. So if you wake up at night, there's always, I'm going to say often, but pretty much always, an emotion that triggers the awakening. The key is to find which one it is. And it's not obvious, it's not something that's on your mind. Most of the time, people who wake up at night don't realize what's waking them up. So to find it, you have to scan your body and identify where is a tension or an unrecognized emotion. Something that's there, but that you're not really aware of unless you consciously put your attention on it. Once you find it, you have to use EFT or peak state techniques to treat the emotion, obviously. And again, it's often linked to psychological reversal around the theme of safety. Be mindful of that. And another reason why people wake at night sometimes is because they need to go to the bathroom. And I found, interestingly, again, something that I did not suspect at first, but when people ask me to work on that, I always find that there was an unrecognized emotion in the bladder area. And often, interestingly, often that emotion was inherited from somebody else, like the parents. It was like a stress that you took on from your parents. So I found things like the anxiety of not being ready, or not having enough time to prepare something, being kind of pressured, or loss of control, or even humiliation, etc., etc. These are not really important because we always have to do some detective work to understand what is the emotion exactly, but the emotion is always around the bladder area, which makes it easy to find, right? So let's move on to night terrors. But first, what is night terror and what's different from nightmare? Well, a night terror, it mostly happens to children. It's something that happens at the beginning of the night, in the deep sleep phase and not in the paradoxical phase. So it's not from a dream. It's not like there's a story and something happens in the story, you're in the dream and you have some images, and there's no story in a night terror. It just happens out of the blue, and interestingly, it's not related to stress that you had during the day or some things that happens in your life, it seems to be coming from nowhere, right? Now, most of the time, that issue resolves on its own with some time and some patience. But if it's ongoing, if it's chronic, then there is something to do about it. So I worked with a few people who had that problem, mostly children. And what I found that the origin of night terrors were always either a feeling of bottomlessness, like a hole in the chest with a feeling of panic. So that kind of holes are really terrifying and really hard to face. So they create a lot of panic and you don't really understand why it's there. Or secondly, I found that there was another type of holes, another type of emptiness that we call sucking holes in our pixel therapy, and they create a need for attention from the parent. So it's both kinds of feelings are emptiness, holes, but they have different effects, right? Now, to solve them, you have to feel the emotion and to use pixel therapy or tapping like the other emotions we talked about. But in that case, they are often quite hard to heal on your own. Why? Because the feeling of anxiety or dread can be really intense, and sometimes it's really frightening to try to tackle it on your own, especially with children. So generally, I recommend to seek help from a professional because he will help you face the strong emotion of both types of emptiness feelings. Now, nightmares. Nightmares happen at the end of the night, and they are like a dream, like a bad dream. So when you're in a dream, you're living a story. You have images and things happen, and there's a sequence of events. It's a story. So, for example, oh, there's a monster chasing me, or I'm running away from something, or I don't know, there's an earthquake, or there's violence, or being held prisoner, etc., etc. There's always a story to the nightmare. Now, in some currents of psychology, they will tell you to analyze the symbols and try to understand the dynamic of the dream, to understand the symbols and link them to what's happening in your life. Now, there's value to that, but it's very often misleading. So that's not what we do in pixel therapy because we want to solve it fast and for good. And the solution is to ignore the story and focus on the emotion, the emotional content of the nightmare. So in the nightmare, you feel an emotion. And that's the key. The key is to find what emotion it is and then to use trauma healing techniques to solve it. And not to try to resolve what's happening in the nightmare itself, but just to find the emotion and use regular trauma healing techniques. And again, there is often a psychological reversal on that type of emotions, but it's not so hard to work on generally. You just have to be mindful of what's really going on at the emotional level and forget the story. And to finish, bruxism. So bruxism is when your jaws are clicking or clenched and you have the tension in the muscles here. Sometimes the muscles are even sore in the morning for some people, or you have your teeth grinding and either you notice it yourself or the person next to you who's sleeping with you is noticing it and saying, you clench your jaws or you have your teeth grinding. And generally when you have that, your sleep is not a really good recovery. So there's always an issue with that. And I've found that it's often due to unresolved stress, generally containing anger, injustice, or anxiety, or powerlessness. Might be other emotions, but look for this one specifically. These are the ones that I've found more often. And it's generally coming from unresolved conflicts in your life. So the solution is to identify what's causing this stress exactly, what's causing you to feel angry in your jaws or powerlessness, etc. And those conflicts can be professional, from your family, from your personal life. They can also be internal conflicts between two parts of you that do not want the same thing. And that generally creates a feeling of anger, like pushing back, trying to push back, or defense. So it's like a struggle. It's like an inner struggle that's never really resolved. Solved. And you have to solve that conflict if you want to get rid of the bruxism. So a good technique to use that we use in pixel therapy is a train brain technique. It's a diagnosis model that we use to find the source of the issue. And I will put a link to another video where I explain this technique. But sometimes you have to do the emotional work for yourself, on yourself. But sometimes you also have to face a conflict if it's a conflict with somebody else or something in your life that needs to be solved. But being aware of it is the key to end the bruxism. So these are the 7 sleeping disorders that I've got experience with, and almost always I find that they were emotion-based. So if you're wondering, yes, I have this problem, I'm not sleeping so well, but is it really psychological? Is it not just physiological? Well, there are 2 questions that you need to ask yourself. The first one is, do I feel 100% calm and peaceful everywhere in my body? So you have to think of these problems that you have and notice if you feel completely calm, completely flowing, at ease, with a sense of lightness everywhere. If not, if you feel tensed or stressed or heavy around this issue, that means that probably there's an emotion somewhere and you have to find it with the indications I gave you. The second question to ask yourself is, do I feel 100% safe and secure in my home? Because if that's not the case, well, obviously that's a reason why you cannot sleep, right? So you have to solve this feeling of unsafety or this stress, tension, emotion that's the underlying driver of this sleeping disorder. So if you are looking for an efficient solution, I'm available to help you. And you can contact me on my website. So it's gaetoncline.com/calendar. And you can book a 15-20 minutes conversation that's free. So I can assess if I can help you, how I can help you, and answer your questions. And the way I work on sleeping disorders is with a pay for results guarantee. And that means that at the beginning of our work, we establish a contract with the criteria of what needs to change, what is your goal, and you only pay when the goal is achieved. So I'm looking forward for having this conversation with you, see if I can help you. If you like this video, like it, put a comment below. If you had any question, I'll be happy to answer them. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.